Hello, and welcome to the Chicago Humanities Festival and today's program, André Gregory in conversation with John Mulaney. My name is Ira S. Murfin, and I am the program manager for Neighborhood Partnerships and a Mellon ACLS Public Fellow here at the festival. I am so pleased to be able to introduce André Gregory in conversation with John Mulaney about his remarkable life. As it was for many people, my first encounter with My Dinner with André was transformative, not only for the radical simplicity of its premise, but for the doors it opened to new knowledge and possibilities, from the para-theatrical experiments of Jerzy Grotowski in Poland to the esoteric spirituality of the Findhorn community in Scotland. The fact that André Gregory turned up as John the Baptist in Martin Scorsese's Last Temptation of Christ just around the time of that first encounter only cemented his prophetic status for me. 25 years ago, I remember a friend snuck me into an acting class he was visiting at NYU, and as he talked for over 2 hours, it was like we got to experience My Dinner with André all over again, with all of the passion and stories, including the addition of uncanny Wallace Shawn impressions whenever he needed them during his speech. I can't wait to see where John Mulaney is going to take him in today's conversation. You can learn more about upcoming events at chicagohumanities.org and help support the festival by donating or becoming a member. Thanks to our captioner for making this event more accessible. All digital events have closed captioning, which can be controlled through YouTube. You can learn more about accessible services at chicagohumanities.org/access. Now it is my great privilege to welcome John Mulaney and André Gregory.
Hello, my name is John Mulaney. I am a stand-up comedian, stand-up comedy being America's least respected art form and most often associated with lowbrow. I am joined today by a man probably identified with highbrow, Mr. André Gregory, who is not always a highbrow person, is not a snob, does not put on airs, but is associated with some of the most respected works of theater and film of the last 50 years. Hi, André, how are you?
Hi, John. What a pleasure to meet you.
Very nice to meet you.
It seems a weird way to meet anybody.
Yes, on the scale of weird, having an afternoon with André from My Dinner with André over Zoom is odd, but these days it seems like par for the course. I don't know.
No, these are strange times. Anything can happen in these times.
Very strange. Yes, anything. That was what I kept saying from Tuesday till Saturday. Anything can happen in these times.
And I'm still saying it.
Oh yeah, that's fair. I don't know why I've breathed a sigh of relief. It's just to manage my crisis tolerance. There's only so much.
I breathed a sigh of relief and I sobbed for about an hour with relief, but I've already started to feel a little anxiety. So maybe you'll calm my anxiety.
I had more anxiety on Saturday, and now I'm having delayed honking. I wish I could go out and honk my horn the way everyone was in New York on Saturday, but I kept thinking something was gonna happen. Now I'm in a calmer state, so don't worry, André. I've seen the future. Whatever you want it to be, it is. I don't mean to be such an interviewer, but this is a time where people can't get together. And your book, This Is Not My Memoir by André Gregory with Todd London, right here. This is a paperback version. You cannot have this. It is a galley. Only I have this. In your book, to dive in a little, everyone is, we're talking over Zoom. We're in separate cities. People can't get together. And one of the most interesting parts of your book was the kind of, not politics, but the ups and downs of running a theater company like the Manhattan Project, which you did. I was wondering if you could share with us, I guess, what the takeaways are from kind of being the, not administrator, but being a creative and running a group of people like that?
It's tiring.
Yeah.
You know, when we had rehearsed The Master Builder and wanted to make it into a film, I called Sidney Lumet to ask him if he would like to direct it. And he said, Andre, I'm 84 years old. Leave me alone. You know, so the kind managing a theater company, performing for critics, dealing with the psyches of actors. Now that I'm 86, I don't think I'd want to do it. It's just too much energy that it takes.
I could see that. How much did you feel that was it an oligarchy? Was it a democracy? I mean, how much did you feel that I mean, I guess you had to rely on the actors for their rehearsal time and helping you build pieces, but how much is one in charge of a theater company, I guess?
Well, as far as the rehearsals go, and as you probably know from the book, I sometimes rehearsed for 14 years.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm Looney Tunes also. Part of the thing about rehearsing for 14 years is
that's a great beginning to any sentence. Yeah.
I met who is that director in LA who made movies very fast with people like Jack Nicholson, and he did sort of horror movies. And
Roger Corman?
Roger Corman, yeah. I met Roger Corman once, and he said, I shoot a movie in 2 weeks. What the hell do you do rehearsing something for 2 years or 5 years or 14 years? And part of what you do is, you know, Lee Strasberg was my teacher, and he taught me that the theater belongs to actors. And as a director, you can guide the actors, but you can, you know, if you have 8 actors, you have 8 contributions, you have 8 minds, you have 8 psyches, and the mixture will be much richer. So I'd say in a way, you're a benevolent despot.
Okay, yeah. Right. Yes, you hold I guess you hold order, but everyone has to be taken into account and heard.
Yeah, and you know, you have to deal with everyone's psyches. And I know, being an actor myself, how you know this, how vulnerable you are.
Oh, I'm vulnerable. I was about to say I'm not sure I'm an actor, but I am vulnerable.
Of course you are.
Yeah.
I was very interested when you gave me a quote from the book.
Yeah.
About how fascinated you seem to be about the fact that I'd failed so many times. You seem fascinated, but yeah.
Well, what fascinated me was that you talked about it, and you didn't really, the writing style, I should say, of this is not my memoir by André Gregory with Todd London, is exactly how life kind of appears in my memory, which is very specific flashes of time. You have extremely precise memories in that, you know, you'll have in short paragraphs in the middle of describing a piece you're working on. But moreover, you know, there's just constant failure, I guess, in the arts and in many things. But people tend to write about it as if it was a journey, and the failure only made them rise like a phoenix. And there's none of that language. There's none of that language in your book, which I appreciate, because I have several things and that were failures in my career, and I go, that happened, and then I did the next thing. You also talk about being fired a lot. So the reason I clung to those was very rarely do people go, that failed and I was fired.
Yeah, when I was young and rehearsing downtown, I'd I'd bump into Dustin Hoffman a lot, who I didn't really know. We just knew each other vaguely. And he would say to me sometimes, well, I've been fired again. How are you doing? And I would say, I was fired again too. You know, in a way, as you probably know, there's no such thing as failure. I mean, you have a love affair with somebody, it doesn't work out, and you learn something about what you might like to do with the next person and what you shouldn't do with the next person. So in a way, everything leads to something. But failure is painful. One can, you know, it hurts.
It's not fun, and sometimes, yes, you do learn from it. But I sometimes look back and go, well, I'd rather the failure have not happened.
Yeah.
I think people like to say, and therefore I am very happy with how every event unfolded. But you're absolutely right. I think things end. You don't have to look at them as failures.
No, I mean, you have a love affair that doesn't work out, and it's unbelievably painful, as we all know, but it generally leads to something.
Yeah.
Or someone else. But I'm with you. Failure is painful. Being fired is painful.
Now that is interesting, because there was a very funny tone that I loved around some of those anecdotes about being fired, because they would normally end on the very short sentence, "and I was fired." Was there a firing you took? Which one would you say was perhaps the most painful?
Well, the most painful, I guess the most painful was from a theater in Philadelphia, where I locked myself. I said, I won't be fired. This is my theater. And they said, well, then we won't pay you. And I said, too bad, but I'm going to keep working. So they called the police to take me out of town. And I closed myself in my little office, and I looked down and I could see the paddy wagon and the police. And I called my lawyer, Alum, who was a very dear friend. I said, Alum, what do I do? And he said, if I were you, I'd go downstairs and do the Bertrand Russell thing. And I said, what the hell is the Bertrand Russell thing? Bertrand Russell was one of the great peace activists. He said, when they arrested him, he would just go limp. I'm sure you've seen that now, thousands of times. He said, just go up to the police and go limp. So I went limp, and they didn't know I was going to go limp, so they didn't catch me, and I fell to the floor. And and then they put me in the paddy wagon, and they took me across the state line and dumped me in New Jersey, and I had to hitchhike home. I'd say that was the toughest.
You hitchhiked back to New York City?
To Philadelphia.
So to Philadelphia.
Yeah, but
you went back to where? Okay, and did you? And I think I recall this, but you didn't go back to that production, I take it.
I didn't know.
When you call your lawyer at that period in your career and you say, "Here's what's happening. I've locked myself in the theater and the police are outside." Was that a time in your life when your lawyer might not really flinch at that news or be surprised?
Oh, he didn't flinch at all. Part of what was great about him as a lawyer was, you know, he represented people like Truman Capote, who'd get busted and put in jail. He was kind of like, you know, the good guy on the block who protects the guys that are being beaten up. No, it didn't faze him at all. And he also knew I was a bit of a loose cannon. So it didn't surprise him.
Right, I guess, yes. I recall that you've been working together for some time. So, you know, there's a paddy wagon to take me, the director. It escalated from "you won't be paid, I don't care" to "the police are coming." I was going to read just a few lines from your book, This Is Not My Memoir, André Gregory with Todd London. And this will lead to a question that will either be interesting or not. We'll see where it goes. You're talking about when you and the Manhattan Project were working on Alice, which was a very well. Chime in when if you think I'm misrepresenting it. A very stripped down version of Alice in Wonderland that relied on the actors and bare lighting and imagination. And
Yeah.
it was a 2-year rehearsal process.
Yes. Short for me.
Yeah, it was a very limited 2-year.
Yeah.
But this really, this really stuck out to me. You said, in many of my works for the theater and in My Dinner with André, I would push as close to madness as possible without falling over the edge. Sometimes I knew this was what I was doing. Sometimes it was unconscious. I assumed I was destined for crazy like my depressed father. In the theater, I could play with that question. I could dance on the edge. Whether the actors knew it or not, whether the audiences knew it or not, Alice was my family portrait, my own descent into their unique lunacy. I thought it was very self-aware and maybe not at the time, though it sounds like sometimes at the time, that you maybe chose to or had to whip yourself into a kind of madness when you were working on things. And I wonder, my question is, I have a similar thing with anxiety around projects. There needs to be a week where it's a disaster,
Mm-hmm.
or I will become superstitious almost. And I've been trying to fight that because it was motivating for a while, but it gets less motivating as I get older. It's nice to just enjoy the process leading up to something. But I wondered if you, yeah.
I wish I were as old as you.
Someday. I even wore a André cardigan for tonight. So, did you? How? It sounds like you were self-aware. How self-aware were you of the state that work would bring you into, and did you kind of like it? Did you think it was a tool?
You know, one of the problems of having a father who was bipolar, which is close to nuts, is you're always afraid you could catch it yourself or that you have the genes for it yourself. So I think unconsciously, I was always worried that I was going to go nuts. And a lot of the work I did, well, in My Dinner with André, the André character, by the middle of the movie, is kind of close to going nuts when he gets himself buried alive.
Yes,
in Montauk.
and Wally, in the build-up to the dinner on the subway, the rumor that he's gone nuts is in the air, right?
Right. So I think because of my dad, insanity was a theme that always fascinated me and horrified me. I think it's part of the reason why I've been in a state of trauma since Trump was first made president. It was clear to me at the very beginning that the guy was absolutely, nuts, crazy, sadistic. And I think that reminded me on a very unconscious level of my own dad. And it scared me. And also as I'm a survivor. You know, we were Jews who survived Nazi Europe. So Hitler was at the back of my psyche growing up, who of course was a total lunatic. So, and then I've been in a lot, I've been in a lot of therapy, a lot of psychoanalysis. So I've come close to things in myself that were very frightening.
Right.
And I wanted to get them out in my work.
So if you were trying to manifest them, it wasn't for a rush or for creativity.
No.
To exorcise them.
Yeah, exercising, absolutely.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
Have you had these feelings?
I've definitely Well, I have wondered how far the anxiety will go,
Hmm.
or the depression that I have will go, because I remember someone saying, "Oh, if you really have a bad case, it'll hit you in your 20s." I don't know who. I listen to advice. I listen to data from people that have no idea what they're talking about.
Right.
And then, years after my 20s, I go, okay, I'm appropriately anxious. I'm inappropriately anxious. I'm I'm drifting into paranoid, and I think I think that there was some, and there still is some notion that that helps me, but it has mainly been a detriment. I don't think, to put it mildly, I don't think being so wrought up that I'm miserable has made projects work better. Has made
Oh, I don't think so for a second.
right.
You know, as you know, there's this, a lot of artists think if they get, quotes, healthy, that their art will suffer. Not at all.
Oh yes,
I, not at all.
not at all. And I think that might be a. I definitely thought, though I was, of pretty sound, healthy, sober mind, like in my years at Saturday Night Live, I thought the chaos of let's stay up till 6 a.m. and that's when the muse will hit us, as
No.
opposed to establishing any kind of writing habits. So yes, I think I've only recently realized that you don't have to. You should be mindful of not descending into it. It's not necessary.
It
And I
doesn't help.
experimented with it a little. And I don't mean to talk about me.
No, no.
I'll wrap it up. The second time I hosted Saturday Night Live, I was determined to have a good time the whole week. The first time I was there, I was so amazed. I was so shocked they let me host. I was so self-conscious. I'd worked there. I knew the people, but now I was there in different capacity. The second time, I said, I'm going to have a great week, and I'll see if the show is terrible because of that. And if it is, then this strange superstition will be proven. And if it isn't, maybe we can move on a little. And I had a wonderful time. I tried to be as relaxed as I could. I felt good, and the show was even more satisfying. So
Yeah,
I do little
absolutely.
rehearsals. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
We talked about the rehearsal length that you've gone to, but even something like Alice, which was would you call it fairly focused,
The
improvising in
rehearsal.
rehearsal? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we rehearsed every day, all year, except for 6 weeks in the summer, I guess, where we gave workshops for actors. So it was pretty focused.
And I guess, like, what was a day like? I mean, what's day 109 like?
It's
When you
like day 3, but a little
okay.
different.
No, that as I asked it, I thought that might be the case. Does the morale is that a factor? Now I say this
Yeah,
not coming from
morale, no, morale can be a problem. Like in a marriage, if you have a long marriage, there might be a spell where it just feels a little stagnant.
yeah.
And it's having the courage to go through stagnation. The word boring for me is always a very interesting one. People get bored in a marriage, people get bored in therapy. For me, boredom suggests that there's a big shark swimming under the water that wants to come up to the surface, and that you're resisting that big shark because you don't know what it is and you're scared of the unknown. But boring can be very, very interesting if you just got the courage to hang in there.
That I'm thinking about the shark metaphor, and I don't want to waste too much of the Chicago Humanities Festival time watching me think about it. So, do you mind if I ask you to go into that more? you think it might be a sort of like you put yourself on pause because something major is coming? Forgive me if I just butchered what you said much more beautifully.
Yeah, no, I think so. You know that you're going into the unknown. You sense in your relationship with a loved one or in the rehearsals that something completely new is waiting to be born. And there's wonder when that birth comes to be. But we're always afraid of the unknown. I think one of the reasons we're scared of death is we don't know what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess you had I guess the difference with a marriage is you're not building towards an opening night, or are you? Maybe I'll have to think about that metaphor more. Uh, was there a desire to let's get this in front of the public, let's get this in front of an audience just for that satisfaction?
Yeah,
And how did you delay that? And yeah.
I delayed that by saying we're not ready. We're not ready.
But did you feel like I wish we could get out there because
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I would think it was I think it would have been a relief, but writers, I think novelists, they take years and years to find just the right word in just this sentence, just that paragraph. They accept that a book is going to take a long time. This is not my memoir. It took 6 years. It's a long time. But because the theater of necessity has been ruled by economics, you just couldn't go for 14 years or 3 years. You couldn't afford to do that. So there's always been a time limit on the theater, which there hasn't been in painting. Painters paint a painting, they don't feel it's right, they put it away, they come back to it 3 years later. Time is essential for anything.
Yes.
I think.
I think so too. I have the dual relationship of, let's say there wasn't a pandemic. Stand-up comedy is something you can try that night.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's filmed that night or becomes permanent that night in your act. But you get that if that's what you're after, you can get that fast, which is I have this idea in front of the public and it kind of worked great. But then I also take a lot of time in between stand-up specials, or at least I'm told a lot of time, because I kind of think of it as, well, I did that one when I was 32 and now I'm 35, but I'm still kind of 32. I'm waiting for something else to come along that shapes it. So it is nice to think in terms of slow time.
How old are you?
I'm 38.
Oh, beautiful age.
Is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
What were you doing at 38? You were...
I was still directing my theater company. I was doing a lot of theater directing at 38.
And Alice, the play that I mentioned, after 2 years of rehearsal, that ran for a while, right?
Oh, it ran for, I think, nearly a decade.
Wow.
And it played in New York for many seasons. It went all over the world. We toured it to France, Germany, England, India. No, it had a long, long run.
Wow. So that definitely paid off.
Yeah.
You talk, I always get mad when people say you talk about it in the book, because you don't. You write in your book, in your non-memoir, about how Alice was a response to the idea of theater trying to imitate film and not being able to, or maybe you could put it in better words, but that Alice was going to be made with what the theater had, not in an attempt to make it look like film. Uh,
Right.
do you do you are you yourself? I guess I feel some theater has now gone back to trying to look like film.
Hmm.
There's all kinds, obviously, but as an audience member, is that something you like, dislike, or are indifferent to, or was it just that you wanted to make Alice in a specific way?
Uh, well, I'm not sure, but for instance, you go and see a production of an Arthur Miller play on Broadway, and there's a huge set, huge,
Yeah,
uh,
there's a
of the
carport that you don't need.
yeah, you don't
Yeah.
need it. The curtain goes up. You take one look at this huge set. You go, ah, and then you never look again. You forget about it. You don't need it. Uh, you know, you don't need music. You don't need lights. What you do need is one actor. You know this very well, and one member in the audience at least. And what that does is when you're not doing all the work for the audience, when you're not giving them huge sets and lights and costumes and music, unless it's a musical, which is great. But um, what it does is it opens up the imagination of each member of the audience and allows them to dream their own dream as the performance takes place. So they're an active audience, not a passive audience. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. There's a, I mean, I think it's used in many art forms, but in television, I've heard a lot. You have to meet the audience halfway is yelled at me often, and
Hmm.
I agree with that. But I think the other side of it is you can only meet them halfway, and they have to meet you halfway. And if you go 70% to please, they can tell, and they
Oh,
back
yeah.
off.
Oh,
They go,
yeah.
no, 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 thank you. Stop trying to sell this to me that hard.
Well, of course, My Dinner with André, which you obviously know very, very well.
Yes, Nick Kroll and I did for the audience watching. Nick Kroll and I took our characters from Oh Hello on Broadway and named George St. Geegland and Gil Faizon, and we presented uh, with Mr. Elvis Mitchell a reading of My Dinner with Andre by Paula Pell as Wally and Michael Keaton as you, Andre, and or your character Andre. But in this original script we unearthed, our characters, Gil and George, were joining them for dinner. And never stepping on your lines, Andre, but interjecting.
Well, people often say, "Oh my God, only two actors, or more in your case, but only two actors sitting at a table and talking. How did you make that interesting?" We made it interesting because it was good storytelling. And if you tell the story well, then My Dinner with Andre is bigger and more spectacular than Lawrence of Arabia. Because in your imagination, you who are listening to it, you start seeing these images of the Sahara, of, whatever.
Yeah.
So that it's actually very visual, but it's all done with words.
I've never thought about that. It absolutely is, because I have my own vision of the forest in Poland and
Yeah,
exactly what that looked like, and I realized that's just mine. There's
yeah.
nothing in the film.
And it gives you a lot of freedom to enjoy your own creative voyage as a member of the audience.
It seems like, not that you were doing this explicitly, but the way Alice took film out of theater, My Dinner with Andre, in a sense, made a film out of what could have been theater.
Hmm.
Was there ever an inclination to do My Dinner with André as a play first? I know that you two were having these dialogues as workshops that led to the script, but
Well, we did do it once as a play for a week at the Royal Court Theatre in London.
oh
And
yes, for finance, yeah, yeah,
yeah, we did it there because we didn't have the money to make the movie, and we wanted
right.
to see if we could find finance in London. And it was one of the most terrifying evenings or experiences of my life, because I walked out onto this little stage and I could see Laurence Olivier and John Gielgud and Peter O'Toole, not because they came for us, they didn't know who the hell we were, but they just regularly went to the Royal Court. And my knees were shaking. It was so terrifying. And what went through my head is, how the hell do I get out of this and just go home?
And you, now this really shocked me, but it shouldn't have. I don't know why I was so naive, but you were not off book, or you were barely off book.
Barely, yeah.
Which I guess I've always taken for granted, that you didn't know your lines, because it seems like two people talking to be a simpleton. But the notion that you had to yourself remember André's lines is quite funny.
Yeah, and it's the longest, I think it must be the longest role in the history of film, or even of theater.
Probably.
Hundreds and hundreds of pages that I had to learn.
Yes, I mean, Michael Keaton could read from the script, and we still we still had pages and pages to get through. So, but you did it at the Royal Court in hopes for financial backing, but you two were going after film directors till you found.
No, we already had our director. We already had.
When you went to the court, sorry, yes, but I just mean the idea itself was always going to be film, and that
always
its own challenges.
Yeah.
And
if we had known anything about film, which we didn't, Wally had one tiny role in the Woody Allen film, and I'd been on the set of Cleopatra watching Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton shoot. That was my knowledge of film.
And not the best film to learn from.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet you outgrossed in the long run Cleopatra.
Right. Yeah. We probably did. But only two guys who knew nothing about movies would have ever thought they could make a movie out of that script. It was folly.
Yes, it was. As a child, I'd see the movie poster. I'd maybe see a clip on Siskel and Ebert, and I thought there was something very interesting about it. The same way Spalding Gray films at the video store would kind of fascinate me, because I thought this is aggressively dull to a child. But I think those, they know what they're doing, and that's interesting. So, and then I watched it when my brain had formed, and it was fantastic, obviously, and I would have liked it as a child, I think.
You know, we got wonderful letters when the movie opened. There was one guy who said, "I've been in the United States Marines for 20 years. I saw your movie. I left the Marines and I'm taking up the cello."
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
That is. Did he give any connected?
No, he didn't say anything.
He didn't say how cello, but okay.
No.
The film was critically and commercially and historically beloved. You were rejected by most. When financing came around, you were rejected by most of your friends and colleagues pretty strongly. Is that right?
Oh yeah. There was one guy who'd invested in my plays over the years, and I sent him the script for My Dinner with André. He said, "I'm deeply, deeply hurt. I've backed you for years. How could you send me this garbage?" Yeah, no, there weren't many people who believed in this.
No, I'm deeply hurt. It's just great to see back from the finance here. This is a tiny question. We're wrapping up soonish. This is a small question that I just found interesting. Was that I'm a big fan of her writing, and Renata Adler introduced you to Wallace Shawn.
Yeah, yeah.
And how did you know her?
I knew her through Richard Avedon.
Oh, so I guess you just knew cool people.
Well, I didn't know cool people really until the success of Alice in Wonderland. And as you know, if you have a hit, you become a cool person.
People come to you all of a sudden, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I just knew her. And interestingly enough, I would say that 90% of my friends are cool people who are having trouble making a living. They're painters who have to teach, writers who have to teach. You're the first famous person I've met.
Well, yourself and what Mrs. Shawn, obviously. But no, yes, same. I think.
Oh, I have a funny story about Mr. Shawn.
Go ahead.
And My Dinner with André. It's a short story, unlike most of my stories. We were walking down the street together after rehearsing an Ibsen rehearsal. And this guy rushed up to Wally and said, "My Dinner with André, My Dinner with André. I've seen it 8 times. You were great. You were amazing." So Wally pointed to me and said, "And I suppose you know my friend." And the guy said, "No, I don't think so." And I said, "Oh, I played the other guy." And he said, "Oh." And then he went back to talking to Wally, walked off. And then he came back about a minute later. He said, "I'm so sorry. You were the waiter. You were great."
The waiters are great, first off, because there's a sense of, they establish a sense of class right away. And I mean, as in class consciousness. So that guy, yeah, that is, I guess, you could have memorized however many, you could have memorized as many words in the English language, and sometimes Wally gets recognized first.
He always gets recognized.
You couldn't have been on screen more in that film.
No.
Do you think to wrap up ish? I guess to wrap up, unless we go off on a tangent that we like.
Before you wrap, I want to say that you are a delicious person to talk with.
I like that adjective a lot. That's great. Thank you.
I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
No, this has been genuinely hilarious and insightful, and I have not paused to take in some of the things you've said as much as I've wanted to, because there's an audience watching. But I will rewatch it because this was very illuminative about a lot of things, including how hard it is to say illuminative. My question was, do you think you would have kept going if you weren't any good?
Oh, what a good question. Probably not. I might not have. Although, and I guess I say this in the book a lot, that I think for people like you and people like me, the most important thing is to hang in there, to not give up, to keep going. So maybe I would have kept going. I don't know.
You didn't. I always felt that if you had a backup plan, you wouldn't make it. That's a little black and white, but.
How do you mean?
If people I knew that said, "I want to be a comedian" or "I want to design video games," I thought, well, then you won't be a comedian. Because there's no incentive. I mean, it's very fun. It's an extremely fun lifestyle. And you're with funny, creative people. And I always recommend going into the arts, because you just meet a lot of fun people. And I do think that balances out some of the times that you don't have enough money to take the subway. But I lost my train of thought. You would have kept going. I was going to say, if you have a backup plan, then you'll go to the backup plan.
Well, I did have a backup plan.
And I'm wrong.
I did say that if I didn't make it somehow by the age of 30, I'd become a psychoanalyst. But then I didn't make it by the age of 30, and I kept on going.
Yeah, I think maybe you knew somehow that by the age of 30 you would be too hooked or too deep in there. Do you feel you've made it now?
Well, that's a very good question.
I know.
Because the question makes me think, made what? For instance, I've got to the age of 86. That's already making it on some.
It's very good to do that.
You know, and I've become a painter. And I look to the future, and I don't know how many more years I'll be here. You know, 6, 8, if I'm lucky. So.
Oh, you get more. We're going to give you more.
I hope so.
I'll talk to you.
But making it is something, it's great. It's wonderful to be successful.
It seems like you enjoyed the successes, which I really like to read.
I did.
You absorbed them and you didn't, yeah.
But then they pass away, as you know, as an artist.
Sure. Sometimes within hours, yeah.
Within hours. And you have to begin from zero again. You know, you just have to start again. So making it in that sense doesn't last. What does last is love. I think that's one of the messages, if there is a message in my book, is that love is more important than anything. It's more important than the hits. It's more, love is a huge thing. And I have felt during the virus that just saying something nice to somebody, we're all so raw and frightened and vulnerable. Just to say hello in a nice way, a sign of affection is a huge thing.
It is, yeah. I don't want to say too much more because that should be, you definitely just said the concluding remarks to this conversation. That was very beautiful. And I won't butcher it with too much verbiage, but it's an amazing book that will entertain people who are interested in a life in the theater, interested in life, or as you very well and articulately pointed out, interested in love. So I thank you for letting me read it because I got it early, and I congratulate you on the book. Even though we never truly make it, this is a high point.
Well, it has truly, honestly, been a pleasure for me because I can see that you're a lovely human being.
Oh,
and
that's nice of you to say.
No, I can tell you do. I think you have a big heart.
And thank you, as do you.
Thank you. That's where we should end.
Thank you, and I would never have you arrested, no matter what you bring to my play.
Nor I you. Be well. Be well.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Gregory, for all your work and for today. This was.
Thank you, and thank you, Chicago.
Thank you, Chicago.